energy shift. Here we go. Project Europe, some of you may have seen last week and the week before, made quite a lot of noise across social media, for good and bad. I wanted to start with setting the scene of why it was created before handing over to Kitty and Alex. So many of you may know, but 20VC also runs a podcast, been running it for about 10 years. It has grown into arguably one of the largest podcasts and media assets across the world of tech and venture, doing about 3 shows a week, 2.5 million plays per show. Interestingly, about 95% of our guests are actually based in the US and are predominantly founders and operators. And a theme that we've been seeing, actually not just over the last 6 months, but over the last couple of years is, Europe, bottle cap regulation. Europe, the best talent comes over to the US. Europe, you can't create great businesses. And this is coming from great founders in the US that have thrown quite significant shade across Europe. And we felt like there is a vibe shift that's needed, and we needed to change something about that. So me and Harry put our heads together. We're like, what could we do here? How can we entice, but actually encourage the next generation of founders across Europe to start building stuff earlier? And so we put the idea out to 10 founders across Europe, all have raised over $20 million, all under the age of 30, and said, if we pull something together, would you be willing to mentor some of these younger founders one-to-one and actually put skin in the game and get involved in a meaningful way? And we pulled that together in a couple of days. Next was, can we go out to the rest of the investor ecosystem, but predominantly the founder side of it, and say, if we put this out, would you put money into a fund to back the next generation of founders? They then turned from 25 to 50 to 100 founders across Europe wanting to invest in Project Europe. And so we thought, okay, it's probably time we take this a bit more seriously and actually put some infrastructure around. And there was no one better in our eyes than bringing Kitty in to be the CEO of Project Europe. 6 years at Entrepreneur First, and she can give a little bit of background on herself and why she decided to join Project Europe.
Yeah, so as Kieran said, prior to joining Project Europe as CEO, I was working at Entrepreneur First, and my role there was to both sort of build institutions that allow people in their early career to attain high levels of ambition and hit their maximal potential. But also I spent so much time, predominantly in the UK, but across Europe, working with people very, very early on from sort of, the youngest person I worked with was 15, I think, who've got these global ambitions for their future, for the things they want to build, and putting them into these cultures of other people who are setting their sights equally as high and surrounding them with support and advisors who can continue to raise that bar for them. And the work was both within the UK, but we were mainly setting San Francisco as this shining beacon, the place you go to in order to attain your global ambition. And for many founders in Europe, it became this thing where you want to go to San Francisco because once you get there, you'll be able to be ambitious, you'll be able to start building things, you'll be able to be working with people who are just like you. And to some degree, that kind of felt a bit treasonous for me. Like, I am incredibly ambitious myself. I have global scales of ambition, but I also love Europe, and I want to be in Europe for my career. I don't want to have to move to the US to be able to hit those highs. And so for me, it feels like almost like a spiritual mission, like something that feels really, really important to me, to be able to make Europe, or to create an ecosystem in Europe that allows people like the people I was working with at Entrepreneur First and people like myself to be able to hit those ridiculous highs and fulfill global ambition from this wonderful continent.
And look, we'll get into what the mission is, what the criteria is, etc. But also part of the process was bringing investors in. And Alex, as a founder himself, multiple times, we obviously reached out to good friend, but also awesome founder. And Alex, why did you want to invest in Project Europe?
Yeah, well, look, besides working with an amazing team, right, one of the best investors in Europe or the world.
Oh, thank you.
Great talent spotter here in Kitty. And then we've got Harry, media personality, famous for his humility. There are 2 real core reasons, right? First one, there is this doomer narrative around the UK and Europe at the moment, and we need to change it. We need to change it quickly, right? There's this idea that you can't build generational companies here, that we can't have a global impact by staying here. And this is the continent that gave us, amazing global brands like Ferrari, LVMH, companies like DeepMind. Some of the most impactful entrepreneurs in the world come from this continent. And, there's kind of a growing narrative that I've seen in social media. You commented on some of the examples of like the bottle cap regulation.
Yep.
But that narrative becomes a reality, right? And I always talk a lot about how important optimism is, right? And we have to change that narrative from a doomer mindset to an optimistic mindset. Great companies can be built here. Great founders already originate from Europe. And if we can get the right talent, the right mentorship, the right funding and resources to them, and we can change the narrative so that they think they can stay here, that's the first step to them actually staying here and building great companies here. And people criticize, when I talk a lot about optimism, people sort of say it's a wishy-washy kind of vibey type thing, but genuinely, optimism and believing that you can do something is the first step to actually doing it, right? And we need to have that can-do mindset here in Europe. And so, the first thing that struck me when Harry reached out, I think he reached out on Twitter originally about it, and I responded confirming that I'd like to be involved within 11 minutes, I think. But he was like, the biggest thing that caught my attention was changing the narrative and turning this kind of doomer mindset that we seem to have here. It is like a national pastime for us to kind of tear each other down, and we really need to change that if we're going to compete on the global stage and continue to compete on the global stage. And Harry's optimism and commitment to changing that mindset was the first thing that caught my attention. And if we can really inject that optimism and positive vibes into the young entrepreneurs here, there's no reason that they have to think that they're going to be hoovered up by, these big American firms or VC investors. They could believe that they can build here. And then believing that they can build here is the first step to them actually building here. So optimism was the first thing. The second thing that caught my attention, one of the biggest talent unlocks I had at my first company, Velocity Black, was a couple of years in, and we were launching a grad program. And we were like, well, hold on, why do we need people who've been to university, right? That is, someone who's been to a great university, that is one way of someone sort of marking themselves out as exceptional and being able to achieve things. There are lots of people who don't go to university and who achieve amazing things, great things. And some of the most impactful founders globally, particularly from the US, are actually people who dropped out of university or never went in the first place. One of the things that caught my attention was, in Europe, we have an obsession with credentialism, right? We think that you have to have, gone to this certain university, worked for this investment bank, worked with this certain type of brand in order to be VC backable or investable as a founder. And the fact that with Project Europe, we're kind of dispersing that, completely blowing up that notion that you need to have gone down this kind of traditional career path in order to build something great, also really attracted my interest. And, the lack of requirement to have gone to university, I think just massively opens up the talent pool. And when we made that change in my first company, it led to some of the most impactful hires we ever made. I had one kid who hadn't been to university within a year and a half of joining us. He was running a $10 million P&L for our business, and he was in his early 20s. I think about two of our team actually at Sequel, two of our best and most impactful engineers, never went to university or dropped out, right? So there is a huge amount of undiscovered talent there, or underappreciated talent, let me put it that way, underappreciated by traditional UK investors, which I think a lot of founders understand that talent and appreciate that talent. And so that was the second thing that really caught my attention. So optimism first, we need to change this narrative. We can build amazing companies here with a global impact. And then secondly, focusing on that really young talent, that young founder. If you look at kind of similar projects in the US, like, the Teal Fellowship is something that this has been compared to,
yes.
Fairly or unfairly. But if you look at the Teal Fellowship, some of their alumni who didn't go to university have gone on to build huge businesses, right? You've got Ethereum, you have Figma. I think when I read last week, I think it's close to $250 billion in value has been created by the Teal Fellowship. And funnily enough, that is more than the value that's created by Stanford graduates who've gone into tech, right?
And do you know how many European founders the Teal Fellowship's backed in the last 3 years?
I don't, but you're going to tell me.
0.
There we go. So,
Right.
so there's a really big, and let me be clear, the talent density here, I believe, is actually higher, particularly in the UK, than even in Silicon Valley. So there is a huge opportunity. There's a pool, there's a well of underappreciated and undiscovered talent. And if we can get them to start businesses earlier, they will have an impact earlier, and that will help, obviously, Europe and help inspire the next generation of founders as well.
Yeah, and look, we'll talk about criteria and kind of the differentiated product that is being built with Project Europe, but as we touched on some of the things that it has been compared to Teal Fellowship, YC for Europe, etc., I think, look, we never put out that we were any of these things, and people would say about the Teal Fellowship, well, look, the Teal Fellowship is a grant. They give these young founders the money, and they don't take ownership in their business. And Alex, you actually kind of wrote an interesting piece last week on Twitter, which is like the kind of the difference between taking a grant and giving away equity in something you do. I'd love to understand why you think ownership matters.
You know, I have donated a lot to charities over the years, and I've obviously done a lot of investing in startups and private businesses. And look, there are cases for things being a grant, and there are cases for things being an equity investment. You know, the one thing I think about the Teal Fellowship, which, you know, I actually think it could have had a bigger impact if it was structured as a for-profit investment. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is, if you think about the $250 billion in value that's been created by Teal Fellows, imagine if some of that money had gone back into a fund and reinvested into the next generation of potential, you know, Teal Fellows, and you realize that actually could have had an even bigger impact. The amount of capital that he's invested in that could have had an even bigger impact, structured, I think, as a for-profit than necessarily as a grant. Doesn't mean it was the wrong way to do it. I just think that would have led to a bigger impact over, you know, multiple decades, rather than, you know, the relatively small $250 billion in value that they've created to date.
And just for everyone's understanding, like, the structure of how Project Europe will work, and look, these things are still flexible, but the idea is that we'll be backing 10 to 15 founders across any country in Europe with an investment of 200,000 euros. That will take roughly 6.66%. Funny enough, we had quite a few posts throwing shade on some of the things. One that was interesting was that 666 was the number of the devil, and therefore we explicitly went out to piss some people off on that side, which was interesting. But the idea is that 10 to 15 founders. Now, obviously, this has gained a lot of momentum. It's not just 20 VC, but we're also partnering with Point9 and Adjacent, two other great European VCs, and then we have 175 investors backing this. So the fund size has actually increased relatively significantly. So it may end up being 15 to 20 founders, but this is the job of Kitty to start molding out what makes a great portfolio here. But kind of back to the criteria, because this was probably one of the spiciest topics of last week. The criteria is very much, we are looking for founders that are under the age of 25, and that is predominantly it, bar they have to have a technical mindset. So engineering-led mind, which is tackling some of the hardest problems. So, you know, not just another calendar app. I'm not against calendar apps, but the idea is who is building something here that can completely transform an industry. And Kitty, like, some of the kind of criteria chat was around this under 25, ageism, etc. But from your perspective, why do you think it's important to have a criteria?
So I think this is a grassroots organisation or movement to build the next generation, or to sort of enable the next generation of founders. And so you have to go early. You have to get people who are at the very, very beginning of this sort of like meteoric rise, so we can accelerate and catalyse that trajectory. And when we're looking at founders to join Project Europe, what we're looking at is both the founder and we're looking at the idea. And when we look at the founder, we're looking at what they've done before. We're trying to start to plot points on this trend line to figure out if it's going up and to the right. And so we want to see that these people have actually, it's not just big talk, we want to see that they've sort of overcome some gravitational pull. They've started to get things moving, and they've done some pretty significant things already. So that's on the founder side. And then also we want to see that they've started to think about globally ambitious things. We look at their ideas. In the application, people will submit maybe just a one-pager, high-level thoughts, maybe a pitch deck if they're further along, and a 2-minute introduction to them and who they are and what they're doing. And the idea gives us a sense of the audacity of that person. And the thing that's really exciting to me is you can take phenomenal people and you can actually, by putting them in environments where you've got people with higher levels of ambition or people founders who've built phenomenal things, you're putting them in a new category where you're sort of upping the stakes, you're upping their ability to be more ambitious. And I expect, in many cases, people will come in with ideas that become these starting points, and through Project Europe, through the ecosystem that we'll put around them, and the resources and the support, those outcomes will be like massively, massively increased. And so, yeah, that's kind of what we're looking for.
And look, like, criteria is criteria now. Things grow, things expand. And Alex, like, I do think one of the things that we have a symptom of in Europe is that if we had created this in the US, the irony would be encouragement. And I think because it was created in Europe, there's a sense of ownership more generally for things like this. And for us, we wanted to be very clear, like, we don't believe there is a product that is best suited for the next generation of founders. It does not mean there is not thousands of products in Europe that are suited for people over the age of 25. And we wanted to be very clear that, like, we want to find people that may not have the confidence to start something. They don't have to be at university, they can be at university. They probably don't have the networks available. So to be able to give them 175 founders that have been there and built companies, great companies in Europe, and access to one-to-one mentorship, and I mean one-to-one, no other program offers that, one-to-one mentorship with a founder that has raised over 20 million, in some cases over hundreds of millions. I think that was important for us, but I think you're kind of on that same sentiment of, like, we need to do something and be very specific with it, but you're always going to get shade thrown on it from certain
yeah, I mean, look, let's be honest. If you're doing anything worthwhile in Europe, you're going to be criticized, right? And it is, and particularly in the UK, right? And obviously with Harry's marketing prowess, this kind of blew up and went everywhere, right? So it's bound to attract some criticism. And, you know, I think any great company and any great fund has a very specific thesis, and they're focused on a very specific niche, right? Yeah. And that's how you get people to talk about it, right? Okay, well, these guys are focused on very specific criteria in terms of age of founder, and people did talk about it because of that. But you also had people who criticized it, right? And, you know, my response to that was, well, look, firstly, there is literally hundreds of billions of dollars of age unrestricted venture capital out there.
Including myself, running a fund for
There we go. There we go. Yeah, see, I would be able to get funding from you guys, you would, right, as an older founder. And then I
wouldn't invest, though.
And then, you know, the second, you know, I think that, you know, first point around age was, I think, completely unmerited, right, in terms of a lot of the criticism that we received. And, you know, and there was also, I found, you know, in some of the founder groups where some of this criticism was happening on WhatsApp, right, behind closed doors, I found that the rationale behind it was not really because they genuinely cared about the age thing. I think some people really were a bit jealous of being left out and not a part of the movement. And then, yeah, look, my main response to everyone when they were criticizing it was, well, look, you should set up your own thing. You should compete, right? The best form of criticism is competition. Go and launch your own project, you know, launch a fund. And I hope that another positive kind of externality and result of Project Europe is many more projects like Project Europe, right? Focus maybe on different age groups or different demographics, right? Which also potentially are underappreciated by traditional venture capital firms. So, you know, if you're one of those people who are criticizing it, you know, my main message to you is go and start your own thing, right? And we'd love to see that, right? We'd love to see more initiatives like Project Europe.
All publicity is good publicity.
I think that it's really important that the reach is enormous. And that was so exciting last week, because the thing I've realized in my work previously, identifying top talent, is like many phenomenal people exist in high ambition groups. And if you can sort of pinpoint one of these groups of people, it could be a hacker community, it could be a university computer science club, it could be people who meet up on a Sunday to share projects. If you can target those groups, great. But the people who are really hard to find are these people who are phenomenally high ambition, but who don't have the people around them, the kind of isolated, high ambition loners. And they're the people who are so hard to find. And they're the people I really hope see Project Europe and on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and in the press, and they're the ones who I really hope reach out to us.
Yeah. And look, like, we made a lot of noise. We did all of the kind of nice fluffy stuff of announcing all of the partners, announcing all of the investors in this, making a lot of noise. Now the real work starts. Kitty started yesterday, first day. We now have to go and find 10 to 20 incredible young founders to back and show that Europe does have what it takes to build category-defining businesses, which I think we all believe is true here. We had our first 100 billion company in Spotify most recently. Like, there are another 10 100 billion companies to be built in the next 10 years, and our mission is to back as many of those as we can, or at least encourage that next generation to go and build. Thank you so much for having us, and check out projecteurope.co if you want to find out more information, or you probably see it all on LinkedIn. We did a nice video, which is quite cool. But yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.